and share my screen. So this workshop is really focused on the CAC grant applications, and we will be going over things that are going to be useful, absolutely, if you're not applying for the CAC grant. Hopefully that this will be useful no matter what your experience level is, and especially if you've never applied for a CAC grant, this is going to be really informative for you. Opening the chat. If you have any questions that come up along the way, please feel free to drop that in the chat. And I'm also going to drop a link to a application template that I created for y'all that actually has like the questions, but also the word count. One thing that's a little bit annoying about CAC is they don't actually put the word count in their guidelines for applying. So this is kind of a useful document. You can just make a copy for yourself to be able to start typing in, grant answers as you desire. All right, so CAC grants overviews. Impact project grants are most likely what folks are going to be applying for. Impact project grants are up to $25,000. They're project-specific grants. There is not a minimum budget level for that. So that means that no matter what your organization's budget or your project budget, you can apply for it. They are focused on community engagement and impact. And so it does have a very specific focus on artists working with communities and community organizations to create a project that really is actively engaging communities, typically communities that are historically underrepresented in the arts. And so again, I just shared that grants app template. I do have templates available for the general operating grants. Just curious, so general operating grants are for organizations between 250,000 and 1.5 million. Is there anybody in here who's qualifying within that range with their organization? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Okay, perfect. So let me share the link for that as well. So that way you can see there are some differences in the questions and the different sections, and so I'll point that out as we go through. So today is more focused on the impact project grant because we knew that that was going to be what most people were applying for. But again, I will make sure and try and touch in on the differences in gen ops and everything that we talk about, especially because we're going to focus a little bit on the equity sections, are going to be really useful for you as well. And there is also a creative youth development grant. And so if you work with youth and you do arts projects outside of school hours, this is another thing for you to consider. I think it's also up to about 25,000. Just curious, is anybody interested? Does anybody work with youth and is interested in the creative youth development grant? Ralph? Okay, great. I don't have a template ready for that one. I didn't have one for all of them. But yeah, again, it's going to be a lot of the same sections. Centering equity is kind of the repeating narrative area throughout, as well as some things like project summary. So everything we touch on today will be useful for that. So all of these are due June 6th. You can apply for both general operating grants and impact project grants. So Jamie, for Cinema SF, that is something to consider. And one other thing I want to just touch on really early on is CAC is very particular. Their application questions are very particular, and they can be really, really nitpicky on details in a way that I haven't seen other funders be. And so just be aware, I saw a project, they submitted the wrong MOU for their fiscal sponsor one year, and they were disqualified just for submitting, even though they had the right MOU for that year. They had sent in the previous year's one, and CAC wouldn't even let them resubmit the new one. So you got to really double check your details in a way that, especially within the arts funding world, isn't typical anymore. So before we go in any further, some of you who have worked with me and done other workshops with me, I like to talk about impact as it relates to grant storytelling and grant writing. Definition of impact. I'm going to work through this really quickly so we just get into the meat of things, but force of impression of one thing on another, significant or major effects. And grant impacts are your project's major effects on individuals, communities, institutions, societies or systems, as well as culture and values. So you can kind of think about it through those different levels. Impacts are important because they tell the story of why your project matters, right? Why is it cutting through all of the chatter of the rest of the projects and the art in the world? And why is it, especially when we're talking about, and it's actually literally in the name of the grant, right? The impact project grants, they are all about community impact. And so really diving into what are the community impacts of your project early on is going to be very beneficial. Impact statements, these are things that can really drive all of your communications, not just grant writing. Once you've really honed in on your impact statements, you're going to find yourself repeating them in your website, in your fundraising appeals, in your grants, all these different ways. And it's really great because it creates a framework for your mission, for your project, for your art, that you can kind of hang everything else on. And so, we kind of think like it's best to think about focusing on 2 to 5 impacts. Even just one impact is fine, but really honing in on like, oftentimes if you get to one impact, you can kind of go in and dig a little bit deeper and you're going to find that actually there's like 2 or 3 under there still. And impact should really be people focused, especially within the arts. It's all nice to talk about changing society's views on things or the culture of this or that, but the truth is that we know that those are hard things to accomplish, and that as much as we want the arts, and we believe that the arts can change the world, can change hearts and minds, it's important to focus on those hearts and minds individually and not so much on like having a vision of a grandiose impact. Because I think when you start to get your head up in the clouds, you really become a lot less grounded in terms of what you're presenting to your supporters, your potential supporters, whether they be institutional funders or individual donors. So these are really quick kind of impact oriented art statements and mission statements. So, right, it's not just like we hold retreats for LGBTQ people, it'd be we hold retreats that help LGBTQ people lead healthier, more fulfilled lives. Healthier, more fulfilled lives being the impact there. An example of art impact statement, it's not just I create sculptures from trash, it's I create sculptures that help people heal from consumerism through connection to nature. And so these are just, again, really quick examples, because we're going to dive right into having you all work on your own impact statements. And so we're going to be using these in the project summaries and when we're talking about the bunch of equity and narrative descriptions that you're going to have to put together for your grants. And so this is some of you, again, like I use this pitch framework a little bit. This is slightly modified for this workshop today. The idea is to create a split up, and we're going to create really quick pitches that are focused on the community impacts of your project or organizations, right? What are the changes that are going to be a result of the work that you're doing? What are the ways that you are creating that change within that community? So we're gonna let's take 5 minutes now for folks to just go ahead and write together. I'll put on like a little song. And then we're gonna split up into pairs and trios. And you have quick 2 minutes to kind of pitch your project and its impacts. And then we want people who are listening to take notes on what worked, what stood out, and did anything have real impact on you. Any questions about this? Right, so I am going to go ahead and put that prompt in the chat. Spend 5 minutes. Again, you're going to be crafting a pitch, but really this is about creating a list of your community impacts for your project or your organization. Think about the ways that you are going to be working with the communities that you're engaged with, and think about the ways that you're affecting. So when I'm thinking about impacts, one of the ways I think about it is the 7 dimensions of wellness. So that's thinking about it's physical, mental, social, occupational, spiritual. Oh gosh, hold on. I've got a list. Later on, I'll actually give the full list. I have it somewhere in another section of today. But so just as you're thinking about it, you can kind of go through that and be, what are the ways that you're making impacts with your project or with your art? All right, I'm gonna stop talking and let you all do some thinking. See a lot of folks still writing, so we'll have 2 more minutes, but we are going to keep this to kind of a quick timing. Just get out whatever's on your brain, whatever you can, even if it's just some rough notes. Thanks, y'all. Gosh, you're mad. We can make it all. Oh, yeah, we can make it all. Oh, only try. Yeah, we can make it all. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard. Oh, we can get it all. If we want it, I know we can make it. I know that we can. I know darn All right, so finish whatever thoughts you've got, whatever sentences you've got going on. I'm going to share the prompts again in the chat with y'all. So again, you're going to take 2 minutes each doing a pitch, talking about those impacts, do a quick pitch about your project, and then go right into those impacts for the community. You only have 2 minutes, and I'm going to do a broadcast whenever those 2 minutes are up so you can move on to the next person. Those who are not pitching, please take some notes on what worked, what stood out, did anything have real impact on you? And then when we come back, we're going to do a large group share about those things. Any questions before we break up? All right, opening those rooms now. Thanks, y'all. Anuradha, are you able to join your breakout room? Neil, are you having any issues? Are you able to join that or? Okay, maybe Neil stepped away. There's always did y'all hit the button early? There's always some folks who hit the button early for breakout rooms. All right, welcome back, y'all. All right, I'm excited to hear how that went. Let's just start with a quick share back. Who's willing to share something that they thought worked really well, either that they did themselves or that they witnessed their partner doing?
Hi, I'm Kelly. I'll go ahead. I'm with the Chico Independent Film Festival, and that was a great wake-up exercise to meet people in the group. That's very effective. Good going, Kyle.
Thank you. Thank you. And was there anything that you felt like you surfaced during that, talking about your own impact or hearing your partner talk?
Yeah, the mission statements get clear on each individual business and its affiliate, and that keeps your head in order of who you're working with and how many people you can work with if you use this tool right. So that woke me up. Yeah. Thanks.
All right, Salima.
Hi. For myself, after hearing my two group members, I noticed I never explained my framework or use the word impact. So that will help me with writing it. And one of the group members is working on a project for Indigenous access and rights, but mixing it like culture. And I really found it interesting because it's redefining something. And the explanation involved like the political atmosphere and the reality right now. So I could actually visualize the impact, the way it was described, and how it could empower and change things. And it made me realize I didn't clarify that when I did it, but what this woman's working on is like, I think, phenomenal. And the way it was put out taught me how to do mine a bit differently. So thank you,
Love
Mary
that.
Jean.
What other insights? Yeah, Alistair?
That was actually just a huge fly in my kitchen. But yeah, I think I also benefited from trying to think about our organization through the lens of impact, because it's just one of those things that seems it's like so omnipresent that it's actually kind of hard to put into words in an effective way. So but it was hard. Like neither of us, I don't think, came up with like sentences that felt like they clearly in the ways that we wanted them to described our impact. So it's still a work in progress, but definitely helped to get the wheels turning.
Yeah, 5 minutes is definitely not enough time to do this. And so hopefully that these notes or whatever you started working on can be something that you can kind of keep refining. One thing I will say is like once you again get those impact statements really honed to where you're feeling happy about it, you're going to find yourself using them over and over and over again in different forms. So it's totally worth investing the time.
I think Alistair really was able to, even just talking it out loud, identify something that was both unique about the organization and its mission, but also very much in line with like the trending direction of journalism right now. And so that felt kind of like the exact right note to hit. Give you kudos.
Thank you for that. That's great. Craig, I see your hand.
WhatsApp audio.
Yeah, so I'm a couple of things I'm curious about. Of course, I went through the roof with anxiety with this, as I always do, but Kyle, when you said that it's about people focused, not changing the world, I freaked out because my entire mission statement's about changing the world. And so I spent the first 2 minutes rewriting it, going like, how's this about people building? And how can I make it about individuals? I'm not sure I succeeded at all, but that's sort of my open question is like, how do you know if that's working, especially for CAC? The other part of the question is how California does this need to be, given that it's the California Arts Council?
Yeah, I think that it's great to keep it focused to California. I mean, they're really talking about community engagement and your community. Yeah, I think they're really interested in like local communities. I don't think that they're interested as much in kind of a broader sense of community that might be national or global in scale. And so, that's just something to think about is if you have a project that is on that scale, how can you reframe it down back to the state? And then in terms of impact, I know, I know your project fairly well, right? Having worked with you a couple times consulting, and I think that there definitely are a lot of ways where you are changing folks on an individual level in terms of giving them platforms to share their stories. And then also, but like, what is the impact that your advocacy work has on those individuals, right? So think a level beyond just the changing the culture or changing policy or changing the world. Once you've created that change, how is that having an impact back on the community itself and on the individuals themselves?
Great, thank you. Very helpful.
Any other things, thoughts or patterns that emerged? Any other thoughts around this exercise and kind of coming up with these impacts? Selena.
Like I mentioned, the word impact, I didn't use it. Are there specific like words that are more powerful or like that should be included in the statement?
Yeah, it's funny. I always am trying to come up with a better word than impact myself, and because it's like I say it so often. And I think that it's more about telling the story of that impact, right? And so like you shouldn't really be saying impact within the phrase itself, right? It should be finding those keywords that really talk with specificity around how your project or your organization are it is changing people's lives or communities as a whole. Is that helpful?
Yeah,
If
it's
I may,
helpful. But I did include like what it's not repeating something that's already been out there. So setting it apart, like, it's meeting a need. So I'm not sure. Oh, I think someone else was going to speak. Sorry.
I think that was me. I didn't mean to interrupt that. It came up, there's a kind of a weird question maybe, and that is that since this will be my second time going for the grant, I've got my first thought is, oh, great, cut and paste, presenting the program that's essentially has the same focus. But how different should it be to make an impact? How much should I just go and say the same thing in different ways, or should I just stick to what worked? I mean, what's the second time rule when it comes to doing things like that? That's kind of the big question I have.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always good to approach the grant with a fresh set of eyes. Even when you put down an application, if you came back a week later, you'd have some new insight, some new things that you'd want to add in there. Also, like, your program shifts, your experience with your communities shift over time. And so adding that in is going to add nuance, and you can talk a little bit about accomplishments. Like, a lot of the times what I try to do on that second year, if you got it that first year, is make sure that you're highlighting accomplishments that you've done in the past year, highlighting things that the past year's grant allowed you to do, taking a moment to thank them for that year's grant and highlight all the amazing impact that it had. And then talk about, and then this year we're doing it in this way, but we're changing X, Y, and Z to make it even better. And we're engaging our community in these additional ways based on the feedback that we got last year, that kind of thing.
Thank you. That's helpful. It really is. Thank you.
Anuradha.
Yes, while we were talking, and I realize when you're talking to another person and you're not just thinking internally, the first thing that you do, I never really got the community, I never really got to the community, what impact it would make, but I got my question right, probably. And the problem that is, while talking, while listening to others. And that in itself, I wanted to ask, when you're writing about impact, the problem should precede the impact, otherwise, how do you kind of talk about impact of what? Is that right? Or
I think that when you have the space to talk about the problem before the impact, but I would actually maybe think about it a little bit as you talk about the impact, then you go back and you talk about the problem, and then you talk about the impact again. Because really, it's okay. You're going to want to repeat yourself. People are reading these rants en masse, and they're going through them rapid fire a lot. So, like, it's okay to be repeating some of the key points of your vision and community impacts and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I think for me, the impact is a lot about the hook. And so you're kind of like talking about, this is what we're going to do in the world. This is why it's so important that we're doing it. And let me remind you again about what we're doing.
thank you.
Great. Anything else in terms of this area before we move on and dive a little bit more into some of the more specific narrative questions in the CAC grants? All right, great. So let me share my screen again with y'all. So I went ahead and I kind of created different areas and the main questions within them. And so I was going to have us read through these one by one, but I think for the sake of time, because we have one more activity I'd like to have y'all do, I'm just going to kind of rapid fire move us through these. All these questions are in that template that I mentioned, and I'll try to stop and remember to go over the differences in Gen Ops for the different sections as well. And again, feel free to stop me at any point. Either you can raise your hands using the emojis and all of that, or put your question in the chat. Project summary, this is the first thing that they ask you to do, only 135 words. Think about using some of the material that you might have just done with your pitches, but really talk about the project and focus on community and impact. Don't spend too much time in this talking about the what, because you want to really immediately talk about the why. You want to make it compelling from the start. And this could, yeah, again, it should double as a quick intro to your project or organization. For organizations, there is another spot for mission statement. And then also just, again, remember, we'll talk about this a little bit more. There's lead artist statement that has a lot of room for you to talk about and kind of expand philosophically. And so you're going to have more space for introducing your project, your art, your organization down the line. This should be really quick, and again, really focusing in on that impact as much as possible. Centering equity. This is a lot of words, so I'm not going to read these all out loud, but feel free to read through, and I'll kind of do a quick recap. But really, so it's like, what strategies are you doing to further your equity goals? And we're going to talk a little bit more about equity, because I think especially when we're talking about arts organizations, arts projects, it can be like, wait, what does my art have to do with equity? Like, what does this, like, how do I frame around this? So right, they're talking about kind of your strategies. And then the next question is really all about partnerships. And we'll touch on again about this later, but it's so important for this grant to have partnerships, because this is all about community engagement. So if you don't have any partners that you're working with on your project, think about how you can maybe identify some quick ones or talk about some potential ones in that area. Then it's, what strategies have you used to uplift historically underserved communities? And they mentioned the California Healthy Places Index. Don't stress about the HPI thing, right? Think about that as a amalgam of equity data that is a mix of racial data. It's a mix of class and economic data. It's a little bit of air pollution and pollution data overall. And so it's something that California's created to talk about equity and kind of resource allocation and intersection of oppressions from a data standpoint. So you want to just be thinking about that focus on historically underserved communities, right? How can you talk about how your work is lifting up historically underserved communities? And that's something that you're going to be talking about repeatedly through this grant. And that's why we were kind of focusing on community impact, and we'll actually be touching on it again. And so don't get too stressed out about the HPI. I've even done LGBTQ oriented grants where I was like, well, we don't technically fall within the HPI, but here's how we are intersecting at all these different oppressions and facing all these different oppressions that cause health and wellness barriers and blah, 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 blah. Right. And so, and we got that grant. So there's ways, I think, again, to just talk about it, that those historically underserved communities, not to get too stressed about the data endpoint. How does your organization plan to identify and evaluate? And so this is where they want you to talk about evaluations, and everybody loves a good evaluation pitch, right? And it's okay for that to be a little bit more theoretical. You know, think about how you would want to gather information. It doesn't have to be all surveys. You know, photos count as evaluation. You can do little videos of people telling the story of what their experience was like at your project or your program. There's a bunch of different ways to do those evaluations, but just have some kind of plan that has specificity to it. And then accessibility is another big portion. They're gonna want you to talk about accessibility. So if you do not have any concrete plans around accessibility, now's the perfect time to develop those. There are lots of really great resources on accessibility practices in the arts. They're constantly evolving. And so I recommend just going and doing a little bit of research on what are the best practices going on. And CAC has some resources on that. It's a little bit overly much. but so just, do a little bit of research on what are those kind of core best practices and build out an accessibility plan for your program. This is an opportunity for you to do that, and you'll be able to use that information whether or not you get this specific grant. So program design and implementation is the next big section. And this is where you're going to talk a little bit more about the project in depth. And so they want you to both talk about your project's objectives, outline the community identified need or opportunity, right? So that's, again, talk about impact a little bit. And then timeline, do like a quick little timeline, and bullet points really work well for this. Bullet points are often your friend and will help people read the information easier. Speaking of, use a lot of line breaks, break up the information, because again, people are reading lots of these grants, and word count is what they're looking at. So adding in extra paragraph breaks just makes it easier for people to parse that information. And another important thing when you're talking about program design and implementation, free/affordable aspect is a key part of the impact project grants. And so you're going to want to be able to talk about that. And this section and the last section are where the Gen Ops starts to defer a little bit. So centering equity is the same for the general operating grant. But then general operating has a management and leadership section, and then an arts and cultural engagement section, versus this, the impact project is like program design, community engagement, social impact, and then talking about local artist support. So, but a lot of the overall kind of themes that they're touching on are repeated throughout. So community engagement and social impact, describe up to 4 historically systemically under-resourced communities. You could even start with that question. You have so many other questions about serving communities. It might be worth tackling that one first if you don't have a clear vision for that yet. Describe how your project will address the healing, stabilizing, uplifting, transforming of an identified community and their needs. And then describe how you're going to center those communities' voices throughout the whole process. And so, hopefully from that impact work, and as you're thinking about community engagement, these questions are going to become a lot more clear for you. And then if you don't have that community engagement process in your head yet, again, use this as an opportunity to start brainstorming that, to really make a list of like, okay, who would you want to reach out to for partnerships? Who are the culture bearers that you want to engage in the process to make sure that they're included in this? Local artist support is the next section. And this is where you get a really wonderful kind of wild card, which is your lead artist statement. And this is a attachment. It does not have a specific word count. It's supposed to be just 1 page, so don't go too wild with it. But this is where you can really describe your vision and talk about your personal connection to the project. And so it allows you to be more expansive. It allows you to be a little bit more philosophical, maybe. But don't lose sight, as you have that ability to talk maybe about your own overall artistry, don't lose sight of coming back to impact and keep harping in on how you are making changes for people in the community. And even, just consider winding through what they're asking for, which is, again, that vision, the community you're engaging, and your personal connection to that community, and then talking back to impact right at the end of that lead artist statement. And one thing that you might want to consider is doing that early on as well, because once you do that lead artist statement, you might find that it's easy for you to pull information and wording that you developed for that and put it into some of those other questions. And then they ask about how will local artists collaborate with the community for the duration of the project. That might be largely a repeat of your community engagement question that we just had right here, right? About how you plan to center community members' voices. That question is not too far different from how are local artists collaborating with the community. And so thinking about reframing that process around community engagement from the perspective of the artists. And again, you don't want to ever repeat yourself, and you don't want to make it seem like you're just repeating the same section again, but it's okay to reiterate it from different perspectives. Again, there's always word counts, and so if you can't fit something in one question, slide it into the next one. Find a way to have it still tie in. And you'll also find that there's questions that will have less for you to add into it. And so when you are finished and you're kind of like, oh no, I have like 100 words too much in this section, but I've only have, but I'm, 200 under this other section, you can often find ways to connect that language in and kind of slide that language into the other section. So real quick, so we may not get to like a full activity, but I think I want us to still work on the equity section a little bit and the community engagement portion, because I think this is such it's a kind of a unique thing that CAC is asking for a focus on. But if you can find ways to focus your art through an equity lens, you're going to find a lot more success in today's funding environment. You're going to be able to talk about your artwork or your arts projects in a way that are really going to help people want to support your project, because it is a very competitive arts funding landscape. And really, you're making a pitch as to why people should care about you. Why should they care about your project? And to do that, they need to know that it's doing something more than just creating art in the world. We all would love to have money for art's sake, but unfortunately, it's a unicorn in our society. You might find supporters who are willing to give it for you, but it's going to be the rarity. And so if you can figure out how to talk about your work in really strong ways around community impact and equity, it's going to support you overall. And it is given a lot of weight in this application specifically. And again, it's just an opportunity to talk about your work through a different framework. It doesn't have to be radically departed from other work that you do or other wording that you use around your project. They talk about it in the application. This is just specific to it. They're like, oh, your organization, how does your organization do this or your organization do that? When you're doing that as an individual artist, don't just think about yourself, but think about also any artistic partners or community partners that you're engaged with for the project. I guess I'm just curious to know, like, equity has a lot of different definitions. Can y'all spitball some ones? What does equity mean for y'all? Just feel free to come off mute and share.
When I think of equity, I often think of, leveling of a playing field. And then centering equity is, finding ways that people other than yourself could benefit and be involved. People who, range in perspective and in identity and backgrounds, and just actually centering that sort of the uncertainty of what happens when a lot of different people interact in the same space.
Yeah, that's great. Does anybody else want to add on to that? All right, well, I mean, that was a really fantastic definition, so thank you for that. I'm going to give you all the official cultural equity definition from Americans for the Arts, and I figured that this is just useful within this context. It's probably who organizations like CAC are going to for their own definitions of equity, cultural equity. So could I get a volunteer to read that out for us?
Read it.
Thanks, Scott.
Cultural equity definition from Americans for the Arts. Cultural equity embodies the values, policies, and practices that ensure that all people, including but not limited to those who have been historically underrepresented based on race, ethnicity, age, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, socioeconomic status, geography, citizenship status, or religion, are represented in the development of arts policy, the support of artists, the nurturing of accessible, thriving venues for expression, and the fair distribution of programmatic, financial, and informational resources.
Thank you. That was great. And so it's wonderful to have that very in-depth definition of cultural equity. Of course, it's now another question entirely is how does that apply to your work? How does that apply to your art? And thinking about that could be easy or it could be more difficult. I was gonna break this up into small groups to do a quick little session, but I feel like we only have 10 minutes left, so I would like to keep us together and maybe just take a couple of minutes for folks to share out what do they feel their project does that helps center equity. How is your project helping create cultural equity? Anybody want to start?
I'll go ahead.
Wonderful, thank
We
you,
have
Kelly.
been K through 25-year-old system that is guaranteed in downtown Chico to change each and every year. And that equity has sustained us through the campfire, through everything, because I started the business during the downturn after 2007. And it benefited with in-kind sponsorships that have sustained. And now the monetary we have to learn at a higher level. And that's where we're at now. But it will be there because the area has grown in 12 years. There you go.
That's great, thank you, Kelly. Scott.
Yeah, let me see if I can answer this. I mean, for one, the definition earlier about the equity, I always see it as like looking at a world that works for all is sort of a phrase that I like. And in the game of Sanfrantopia, the players are encouraged to be become heroes of the Goldfire. The Goldfire is the current of connection and collective joy. So the players, everyone that plays, is encouraged to become a hero of the Goldfire by sharing their stories, by engaging in collective problem solving, and participating with like maintaining the play for everyone. And in this way, everyone is shown that their stories and their participation matters, that their agency matters, that the participation with their community matters. Yeah, so that's kind of how we're approaching it.
I love that. So a lot about public theater and helping people become a part of the story.
Yeah, the game mechanics of Sanfrantopia model cooperative gameplay behavior. They model pro-social behaviors, and it rewards people like that their effort makes a difference. That every person's story, every person's effort, every bit of participation raises the collective good, and you see it literally reflected in gameplay.
That's great. Who else would be willing to share? Mary Jane, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share, since somebody celebrated how you were sharing about your project in the first activity.
Yeah, sure. I'm having a little bit of trouble with the word equity, and I'm not sure that I really want equity. One of the difficulties that I have is that when you're less than 1% of a population as a Native group, it becomes really, really difficult to participate on a level playing field at all. And I would like to see something that not just encourages equity for individuals, but equity for communities. In other words, when we want to have gatherings of intertribal people and support the dance groups coming into the city, what I really want to see is to see the city realize that perhaps there are housing issues and healthcare issues and economic issues and educational issues that can be community-wide. They always tell us that we cannot put you into a housing community as Native Americans because it becomes a racial issue. And what I'm saying is that Native people include all races. Our nations have intermarried for a long time, and we have included in our nations people of all races. And what I would like to see is to have, because of the inequity of the lack of recognizing treaties in California and the lack of federal recognition of treaties that apply to all citizens of our nations, perhaps we could model behavior in the city to change the way that equity really looks, so that when we have housing available, Native people can go to the top of the list because it was promised by treaty. So that's kind of the something that I'm talking about. I don't know whether it really fits as equity or not, but I would like to see community equity,
I think
not
that
just
absolutely
individual
is.
equity.
I think that's absolutely equity. I think that equity is not equality, right? Equality
Yeah.
is everybody gets the same thing. And so that's not really what's needed in this society, because we have so many centuries, millennia of historical oppression and all sorts of violence and terrible things that have happened that have created these intersecting oppressions. And so no, equality doesn't work, right? Equity is, I think, what you're talking about, which is, how do we make sure that those people who need the resources the most, who have been discriminated against the most for longest, will get those resources first.
I think that's a great point.
And I think that the way that you were talking about your project around how, as you're doing this cultural work, you're also trying to raise awareness around all these other ways that health and wellness are impacted for your community. I think that is exactly what this grant is about, right? It's about talking about those other ways that you are lifting up your community through the arts.
Cool.
I was going to say
And
that matches up with the DEI definition of equity, where you're looking at each individual has different circumstances or the social location, and it can be historical, and then expanding it to the entire community. But it's matching up the resources that are needed so that that community and individual has an equal playing field. So it's not, simply just giving out resources, it's matching the need. So I think that's kind of what goes there.
Yeah,
In my project, a lot of it's focusing on accessibility, and that looks like not just physical accommodation, but financial, because people experience this and can't access the kind of counseling and support if they don't have the resources, which disenfranchises mostly queer and BIPOC, trans, and the idea is so that it is affordable, so that takes a huge barrier for access of.
Yeah, class accessibility is really key in the arts, especially.
And Kyle, I'd like to add that, with our theaters, we are really reaching out to communities that don't normally get a platform, because within the platform that we provide can be very expensive. And we really are trying to reach out that if there is movies and speakers and music that go together to highlight certain issues that different communities have, that's where our funding comes in, to be able to help those communities have a platform, a space to show those. And that's kind of what we're trying to do, and keep it going and move that even forward more.
Right. And then think about the next layer of impact beyond that, around once those communities had that space to tell their stories, how does that change their situation, change for themselves individually or for their communities?
Because we've been able to provide those spaces, for not just, expression, but also to be used as fundraisers and advance awareness. And so that's what we're, one of the things we're fighting for these theaters is to be able to continue with those spaces. And, I hope anybody here would reach out to us if they had an event like that, they would reach to us, and we can put something together as well with everybody. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, Ralph.
Yeah, well, you may be getting a call from me, Jamie, sometime, because it sounds like we would be a perfect fit. But no, for us, what I found is because we're only 3 years old, our organization, and I found that we came in with real lofty ideas. We're going to make things accessible to everyone, and we're going to provide, educational services and everything for people who need it. But we're too small to know who really needs it. And I think that was one of the biggest problems we have. We don't have a way of judging whether somebody, deserves free services. We don't know. We have people, fill out applications or go to a private company to see if they really deserve financial aid. And that was just something that just left a bad taste in my mouth. So for us, the best thing to do was to simply provide services for free across the board. And what made it difficult before made it a lot easier. Then we focused our attention simply on outreach to underserved communities, like reaching out to Title I schools and providing these services for teachers and that serve people in an area where they are better equipped to serve them, and we just simply become a supplement to that. I think that was the biggest challenge, is judging what our capability is rather than our lofty ideas, and try to work with the community to be able to better serve in that way. But that was what I noticed to be the biggest thing. We just don't have the board to decide if someone should get free services or not. So working with other organizations made it easier. So
That's fantastic, and that's a really great example of community engagement and partnership, and using the tools there to really try and arrive at a place of equity. We are at time, y'all, but I will stay behind a couple of minutes in case there's any other questions, if anybody else wants to share really quickly. It's been a really treat just doing this with y'all. Also know that I am available to help as one of IAM's consultants. So if you want some real quick, review of your grant language as you're developing it, please feel free to reach out. You can reach me at kyle.devries@gmail.com. Right. Any questions? Thanks, y'all. Any questions or anything before y'all go?
Thanks,
All right,
Kyle.
well, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Kyle. You have a sec? I'm just curious to get your.
Thank you.
I'll stop there.